I think that the millennials, if they get in right now, and this applies to us too, right? Like, I don't know if I'm going to live another 45 years. If I live to be over 100, I got a lot of leash left here. So I still have to remain in the trenches and pay attention to what's going on. I'm not like my parents. I'm sort of caught in the middle where we're having to worry about taking care of our parents, but we're also looking at our kids who are adulting into this mess. And the kids need to do something. The 20-somethings need to do something, because my youngest child, he's actually working full time. So he's doing a professional job like he will continue to do when he graduates. And he's making double what I did. He's making double what I did 35 years ago. And yet his rent is 12 times what I paid. How is that sustainable?
Ready to live at the higher vibrations, where peace, love, joy, and good health are the daily standard? That's what this show is all about. Welcome to Vibe. And here's your host, Robin Openshaw.
Hey everyone, Robin Openshaw here. Welcome to the Vibe Show. Today I want to talk to you about, why do you see GreenSmoothieGirl talking about Bitcoin all the time? Why on earth would I have a set aside your Wednesday night at 8 p.m. time for a mastermind? 4 years now I've been doing it, and I don't intend to stop. And I think it's one of the most important things I've done. Why is GreenSmoothieGirl, who we know to have taught us about green smoothies back before anybody knew that was a thing, teaches us about detoxification, how she got her health back when she tipped over age 28 to 32. We know a few things about her, but why Bitcoin? Well, I kind of want to explain that. I want to talk to you about what's going on in the world of Bitcoin, sort of jargon free, because if you decide that lots of smart people you know are shifting some of their net worth or their store of value, I might call it. Okay, that's sort of an all-encompassing word that sort of means your savings, your storage of your net excess energy your whole life. Okay, it's what you've been saving for so that you have a decent retirement, so that you don't have fear of the future, so that you don't have anxiety about not being able to pay for the emergencies that come along, so that you have a quality of life, so that you can help your kids when they're adults. Okay, these are the things that are on the minds of people my age, Gen X, and also boomers. We know that we can't hustle and grind till we're 90, and we don't want to. So as we see the economy change, we were here during COVID. We watched the government bail out everybody. Okay, back in the Obama years, remember, the banks started to fail and Obama bailed them out and threw $1 trillion at that problem to stop the dominoes from falling. I remember people being so upset. Well, it's hard to know how many trillions of dollars were actually spent starting in 2020 with COVID. But what we do know is that it's many trillions of dollars. I've heard estimates that exceed $20 trillion. And if you don't know what $1 trillion is, you're in good company, because basically it's a number so big that the human mind can't conceive of it. So in recent decades, the whole school of economics has been sort of hijacked by what is called Keynesian economics, where basically there's a whole ton of PhDs out there, including many of the about 1,000 of them who work for our Federal Reserve, who literally believe, because they were trained in school, that you can just print and print and print money. Well, why is that a bad idea? And why, if every fiat currency like our dollar has failed throughout history, why should you and I pay attention to this? Okay, a lot of my audience are women who they've tended to the family's health. And that's why you follow me. And maybe you have a husband who he's the one who's tended to the family's financial health. And maybe that's not typically been in your domain. But in my Wednesday night masterminds, I have quite a few women who that really hasn't been their focus. But because of what happened in COVID, it woke them up to a lot of things, including that we may have printed over $20 trillion that is going to, over time, and is right now, debasing the dollar. And what that means in real terms is inflation. You've seen the price of everything go up. You've seen that life has gotten unaffordable for our children, our children's generation. Some of you have adult grandchildren, Zoomers, for whom they don't even have owning a house on their bucket list of dreams. It's just off the table. They just don't think that's ever going to be possible for them. Well, one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about Bitcoin is that I believe that just like the boomers created affluence by investing in their homes and some of them in additional real estate. And they actually became wealthy, maybe even if they did, uh, working class jobs. Maybe they were a welder. Maybe they worked for the county and retired, and they're really very comfortable because of their investments in real estate. Then my generation, which is I think it's the smallest generation in US history, Gen X, because our mothers were the boomers who were pulled into the workforce, first generation of women who were en masse pulled into the workforce after World War II. So it wasn't that cool to have babies in the 1960s. And so we're the smallest generation. We're known as the latchkey kids. My generation, at my age, I'm 58, we tend to have made our wealth to the extent that my generation has wealth in the S&P 500 or in the stock market, okay? So by the time we came along and went into the workforce, if we started to just put money into, on a monthly basis or paycheck after paycheck, put money into the stock market has consistently climbed. Well, now we're looking at a stock market that by basically anyone's estimate is maybe even hundreds of times more expensive than it should be based on the earnings of the underlying companies. So there's really no explaining how high the valuations are in the stock market, besides that there's some kind of unseen hand in government keeping asset prices inflated for the sake of the wealthy, for the sake of the 1%. So I think that the millennials and Zoomers big chance to make their own wealth. Like my generation had the stock market and 401ks and pension plans, and boomers had mostly real estate, but they too were the first ones in on government instruments like 401k and pension plans and all that. The millennials and the Zoomers, their chance is Bitcoin. And I want to tell you some of the reasons why. And if you are Gen X or Boomer who's going to try to wake your children up about this, maybe by sharing this video, just know you're not alone. I've had to wake my own children up about it. I've been pretty relentless. I got someone else who isn't me, who's super educated about Bitcoin, and together we did a class for my children, and all four of my kids got on the class, and we spent like an hour and a half teaching them about Bitcoin. One of my four children says, "Hey, Mom, I don't get it. I don't understand it." And I'm like, that's because your entire exposure to it is an hour and a half. The thing with Bitcoin, which is very frustrating for those of us who've gone into it as a store of value and more of our net worth, I currently have half of my net worth in Bitcoin. I did not set out that way, is that we've spent the time. In my case, I've probably spent over 1,500 hours now poking holes in it, researching it, asking every hard question about it, listening to every smart person out there, not just the ones who were saying Bitcoin is the future and Bitcoin can solve tons of our problems. And it's happening right now. There's hundreds and hundreds of companies that are developing on top of Bitcoin, solving hard problems. Like I could tell you about the alternative to health insurance that I'm involved in that is Bitcoin backed. But that would be a side tangent. But I told my daughter, and I'll tell you, that the people who gain the conviction in Bitcoin are the ones who actually spend the time studying it. Michael Saylor, who is kind of the one that we are all most fascinated by because he was the first CEO of a public company to not only invest in Bitcoin, but also he seems to have entirely shifted his public company, MicroStrategy, completely into being Bitcoin backed. But then he went further and he seems to be completely repositioning his company to be probably one of the first and premier Bitcoin banks, where the asset is Bitcoin, maybe lending in dollars. So I don't think he or I or anybody else you're listening to thinks that the dollar's just going to tank in the next couple of years or even in my lifetime and people won't use dollars. That's not really the thesis. But I told my daughter, Michael Saylor says you have to put in a couple hundred hours before you can even say you are educated about and articulate about Bitcoin at sort of an intermediate level. And I totally agree with Saylor on that. I am in the second big wave of Bitcoin investors. So I wasn't out there 10 years ago when people were, it was the Wild West. People were holding Bitcoin on paper wallets. The exchanges kind of were just trying to figure things out. And, Bitcoin was being lost because it was just the wild West of Bitcoin. I came in the second wave in March of 2020. And it was when economies of the world were being shut down. And we were being told, just go home and shut up. It's 2 weeks to flatten the curve. Nothing about that sounded true to me. So I just kept researching 16 ways from Sunday. I felt like there's no way this economy could survive. I went to the bank to withdraw $50,000. I couldn't get it. I started to realize that it's true what I had read, that banks don't have the liquidity to cover even like 1% of the holdings in the bank. It's basically a big shell game. You have a bunch of zeros and ones on a computer. You couldn't go get all your holdings out of the bank if you wanted to, and if you drove to every bank within 100 miles of you. I had over $1 million in Wells Fargo the day that I went there and asked for $50,000. With what was going on in our economy, I assumed that a lot of people would be really upset and wanting to hold some cash, and that I would be standing in a line that went all the way outside the bank and down the sidewalk. Maybe it's because I know a fair amount about history and I remember similar photos during the Great Depression, but we live in a digital age now. People are mostly asleep, believe what the media tells them, and nobody was there. Nobody's there. I was the only one there. And even though I have $1 million in that bank, they did not have $50,000. They did not have $50,000 to give me. And they told me, they called around, and between 3 banks that I went to, 3 branches of Wells Fargo, I was finally able in the course of a few days to get $50,000, which I wanted to hold because I felt like you can't do this much damage to the economy where we really have no end in sight of it, because 2 weeks, there was no way. But what was interesting is what I did not foresee is that the government would just start printing money. And they bailed out everybody from small businesses. All small businesses were bailed out, and you didn't even have to do much. My bookkeeper just filed. He even asked me about it. He just filed, figured I wanted free money from the government. And he did that both times. There was a bailout for small businesses twice. Otherwise, we would have all gone under. Sometimes I wonder if people realize that all the small businesses would have gone under when they prioritized Home Depot, Walmart, Costco, the ones that were allowed to stay open, and everybody else had to just stay home. I do not think that my business would have gone under, but we just had complete chaos in supply chains and all the other businesses that we have to interact with or partner with. So I think that the millennials, if they get in right now, and this applies to us too, right? Like, I don't know if I'm going to live another 45 years. If I live to be over 100, I got a lot of leash left here. So I still have to remain in the trenches and pay attention to what's going on. I'm not like my parents who are 82 and are actively planning for entering a care facility. I'm sort of caught in the middle where I am having to help. Luckily, I've come from a big family. I'm certainly not alone. And I don't even live in Utah where they do. We're having to worry about taking care of our parents, but we're also looking at our kids who are adulting into this mess. And the kids need to do something. The 20-somethings need to do something, because my youngest child, who is just graduating college this semester, lives in a dive apartment like I did my last semester of college. He's actually working full time. So he's doing a professional job like he will continue to do when he graduates. And he's making double what I did. So what was that? 35 years ago. He's making double what I did 35 years ago. And yet his rent is 12 times what I paid. How is that sustainable? And I feel like a lot of, especially affluent Gen Xers and boomers, like my mom sure doesn't know this. I've tried to explain this to her. They don't realize that our children are making double what we did. And that's because the dollar is worth less, but their cost of living is a multiplier higher than ours. If my son has to pay 12 times as much rent as I did, how much is left over for him being able to invest, to ever be able to hope to buy a home? And then there's the fact that the price of homes has soared out of reach. People think they're richer because their house is worth more money, when actually the dollar has been debased. All this money printing, dumping it into the economy, it just means that your dollar is worth less. So yes, your house is worth more, but not really when you adjust for inflation. So I want to teach people about Bitcoin because when I was teaching it 4 years ago, it was a safe store of value that you could know your 12 seed phrases. You could literally walk naked across a country's border and access your Bitcoin. I don't know why you would walk naked across a border, but the idea was, even if you didn't have your cold wallet that you might keep in a safe or whatever, you don't actually even need it. If you know your 12 seed words, you can recover your Bitcoin. It is on what is called a blockchain, which is a public ledger, and everyone can see the transactions happening on the ledger. It doesn't put your name in it. So it's somewhat anonymous in that you're not going to see someone's name, like somebody just bought 1,000 Bitcoin. You're just going to see the transaction. It's not a way to avoid paying taxes. I am totally going to disclose my capital gains, having sold some cryptocurrencies. But the more I get into it, and the more hours I put into researching it, and the more I look at the ups and downs of not just Bitcoin, but also all the other alt currencies out there. There's still some alt currencies that I hold. Most of them I've sold, and I become more and more interested in Bitcoin, because Bitcoin's main use case is as a store of value, basically digital gold. In fact, I used to stack gold when I was a single mom with 4 young kids, couple teenagers, couple younger than that. When I had extra money, I would buy gold and I would keep it in a safe, and I moved it all the way from Utah to Florida, and I had it in a safe, and it made me nervous. And then I just started learning more and more about gold. And I don't have time right now in this forum to go through all the reasons why I decided that I would rather sell all of that gold and put it all into Bitcoin. But you're never going to make a decision like that. And I'm not saying you should, until and unless you put some time in. Not saying you should spend 1,500 hours. I bet you have stuff you'd rather learn about more than Bitcoin. Because if you're listening to this as someone who doesn't know much about Bitcoin, it's probably because you have other things you'd rather learn about. And actually, that was me too. All my research went into health and wellness topics. And I love history, like the real history, not the greenwashed history we learn in the history books in school. And I'm interested in geopolitics, and I pay close attention to both of the biggest wars going on in the world right now. Like, there's so many other things I like learning about, but the more I learn about Bitcoin, the more interested I am in listening to not just what people out there like Michael Saylor, who has burned the boats and gone full Bitcoin, which is an alternative system to the dollar, not just what they have to say, but I listen to absolutely anyone who wants to criticize Bitcoin, debate one of the Bitcoiners, and say what's wrong with it, and say what the risks are with it and why they're not in it. And I listen to them every single time I see them. Okay. If I see somebody who's doing a debate arguing against Bitcoin, I totally listen to them. Okay. I could give a 1-hour lecture on what the arguments against Bitcoin are too. So they're getting thinner and thinner. Because 4 years ago, like I said, it was a store of value outside the dollar because there's only 21 million Bitcoin that will ever be available. It is not possible for there to be any more Bitcoin. So it protects us from what we're in our dollars. So what I'm seeing around me all the time, every single day, is people griping about how expensive life is getting, but they're sitting there in dollars being debased and they're not doing anything about it. They're not crossing that bridge to learn about Bitcoin and how they could be in a perfect money where they cannot ever print more. If I could only tell you one thing about Bitcoin, it would be that. And if I had to explain why I, after, like I said, 5 years of research, sold all of my gold holdings, I mean, all of my gold, maybe I'll give you a couple quick data points or bullet points on why I sold all my gold. I had $1.2 million worth of gold. One reason was that it was sitting here in a safe in my house so that if somebody broke in and held a gun to our heads or held a gun to my husband's head, if somebody did that, I would open that safe and I would give them the gold, etc. Like, open that safe or we shoot your husband. I could imagine a lot of different scenarios like that. I just didn't like that I had, yes, it's tangible. Yes, I could hold it in my hand, all those things. But I started to have other concerns about it, like really how gold has failed and how governments don't back our currency with gold anymore. And supposedly we're supposed to believe that there's a whole ton of gold at Fort Knox. But even if there is the amount of gold that they've been telling us there is at Fort Knox, it certainly doesn't back our dollars, our little green money made out of like some blend of cloth and paper or something like that. Those pieces of, I wish I had one with me. Pretend I have a 20 here. Those pieces of fiat currency are really debt instruments because we live in a debt-based economy and our government is not paying for all the stuff that you see out there, the roads, the schools, funding the war in Ukraine, funding the war in Israel or in Palestine, really. They're not funding it with our taxes. We always say that, the American taxpayers' dollars. Okay, the American taxpayers pay a certain amount of money that doesn't even touch how much they spend. So they have to keep printing money and printing money. So you are in a system that is circling the drain. As long as it was happening at 2%, that we only had inflation of 2% a year, people would tolerate it. Well, there was a month in 2022 where the amount of inflation the government would admit to based on the consumer price index, which I think is heavily manipulated to look lower than it is, hit 9.1%. So there have been months where we've hit as high as 9.1% inflation. Okay, so annualized, that year didn't look that bad. It wasn't 9.1%. However, if you do your own math about how much your life costs and how much more homes cost and how much more gas is kind of low now, but you recall that for a couple of years their gas prices were up and Americans were screaming. Really hard to get low wage workers to drive very far to go to work, or it didn't even make sense for them to show up. But anyway, gold. So back to the gold issue. I didn't like that it was, that's what people like about it. It's tangible. I can hold in my hand. Sure. But I leave my house for extended periods of time. I travel. I have another home. And I didn't like that I was always kind of uneasy about leaving my house and my safe because I literally had over $1 million worth of gold. But there were other reasons. One of them was, like I said, Nixon detached the US dollar from our gold reserves in 1971. And the reason was that other countries who had lent us money under the understanding that they could cash it in for gold, France wanted their gold back. They sort of lost confidence in us and they're like, we're sending ships over. We want our gold back. Nixon sent them back some of the gold and then canceled the dollar being backed by gold. Well, we're kind of a big deal here in the US because we have the global reserve currency. So when we print dollars, we don't feel all the pain because dollars are being traded all over the world. So we can print dollars and we Americans don't have to feel all the pain. We certainly have felt some of it. But Nixon said it was temporary. Well, the problem is that was 54 years ago, and we still have never returned to having a gold based dollar. So I kind of have to assume that it's not temporary. I kind of have to assume that our debt instrument that we call dollars is what we've got. And what it's backed by is nothing more than the faith and confidence in the US government. Well, I don't know about you, but my faith and confidence in the government has been damaged. And so I'm looking for a place where, because I don't want to start over at 58, I don't want to get wiped out and have to start over. Okay. Happened to me when I was in my 20s and 30s. I'd lose something because I didn't invest well because I didn't know how. I would like to hold my store of value in something that cannot be debased. Okay. I don't want to sit there with dollars in the bank, which aren't really mine anyway. It's not like I could go there and get it all in cash. They'd totally not give it to me, as per my story that I told you earlier. Also, if I did sit there and hold it in cash and put it in my safe, it would be losing value. Right now, as I'm speaking to you in 2025, if inflation doesn't get worse, and it pretty much will, especially with the tariffs, if that happens, and it looks like they will, we will have 6% inflation this year in 2025. If current numbers for the beginning of the year hold for the whole year, probably we're going to have worse than 6% inflation in 2025. So if I hold my dollars in the bank, where when I was a kid, I got 6% interest for holding my dollars in the bank, but now I don't. What do they pay you now? Some little fraction of 1%. Okay. Savings sort of went away a long time ago because you're saving, what they pay you for holding your savings in the bank doesn't even come close to inflation, even before inflation went up. So Bitcoin's kind of bringing savings back. It's one of the great things about it. The fact that there can only be 21 million and there are nodes all over the world. These node operators can't collude with each other. They don't have a way of getting in contact with each other. The system was built so elegantly that it is decentralized. There's no company called Bitcoin. There's no company that controls Bitcoin. Okay. It was built by somebody. We don't know who Satoshi Nakamoto was. We don't know if it was a person or an entity. Kind of looks like it was just a person who learned from all the people who've tried to create perfect money with scarcity and is absolutely transparent and that everyone in the world can use, and that allows you to make an exchange of value with someone else peer to peer without involving a bank. See, then you're kind of stressed out by a bank holding your money because FDIC says, well, we'll insure you up to $250,000. And maybe a lot of you who have under $250,000 in a bank are like, that's great. But what happens if they have to bail out everybody? Again, more printing of tens of trillions of dollars. And we're already $37 trillion in debt. So literally in the next few years, just making interest payments on our national debt will gobble up every single dollar in tax receipts. Of course, Trump is making noise about getting rid of the IRS and funding government with tariffs. Wouldn't that be great? That would totally incentivize business ownership. We'll see what happens in the Trump administration. It's definitely given entrepreneurs a shot in the arm. It's given us some hope, a reason to think that we can hold on, we can survive, we can innovate, we can create jobs. But Bitcoin is another thing that gives me hope, because Bitcoin is volatile. That must be expected. Your first 4 years are a cycle. 4 years is a cycle. Then there's a halving, which cuts the number that can be mined remaining in half, which just makes Bitcoin more valuable. And there's miners all over the world. The United States has more miners than anybody. But I could have never imagined 4 years ago, could have never imagined that in 2024, 11 banks were approved by the SEC under the hostile Biden administration. Okay. The Biden administration was terrible for crypto. The SEC wanted to shut stuff down. And even so, Bitcoin grew enormously under the hostile Biden administration. Do you think governments can shut it down? Putin said to a huge investing conference, Putin being the leader of Russia, a couple months ago, right here in 2025, that there's no shutting it down. It's digital gold. There's no ability of government to shut it down. They can kind of control choke points to a certain extent, and the Biden administration certainly did try. And that means they do draconian things to you where you have to cross a bridge to be able to sell or to use your Bitcoin. But the Trump administration is so pro crypto and pro Bitcoin specifically that they say choke point 2.0 is going away under their watch. So during the 4 years of the Trump administration, God willing, the man stays alive, there should be a lot of progress, a ton of Bitcoin innovation, like the US just did last Friday, which is announce a Bitcoin reserve, which means our nation is investing in Bitcoin because they don't like their dollars being debased, the dollars that the government holds either. And they don't really want to be in the stock market. They don't want to be dependent on just American stocks and bonds, which, bonds have fallen behind inflation at this point. You can go buy whatever bonds you want, but you're going to lose money. So anyway, our US government has openly said Bitcoin is our digital gold that we want to start holding in. The head of our country, Donald Trump, and Elon Musk, who is leading the charge on cutting the corruption and the fraudulent spending, they're saying we want to audit Fort Knox. We're supposed to have all this gold. How come nobody's ever seen it in 100 years? There was one time, I think it was 1974, they let like 100 journalists in, and it was just kind of a press event, and they let them look at what looked like a bunch of gold in one room. And that's what it was. It wasn't an audit. So if we are backed by gold in Fort Knox, how come I cannot Google and find how much we spend annually to guard the gold in Fort Knox? Try. Let me know if you find out how much we spend to guard this supposedly massive stash of gold. It's also really hard to move gold from one point to another. If a country is going to do it, they got to put a whole bunch of gold on a boat. They got to insure it for billions of dollars or whatever, hope it doesn't sink, send a bunch of security to load it and to unload it, worry about all these headaches, and it costs them about 10% of what the gold was worth. And frankly, gold failed as the ultimate store of value 400 years ago when Spain was trying to take the Netherlands, and it had to finance its army there. And so the King of Spain sent a ship full of gold to the Netherlands, and guess what? The Queen of England intercepted it, took it to her own port, stole it, and the Spanish army had to fold. And that is why the Dutch in the Netherlands are Protestant, because had the King of Spain won, they would be Catholic. So just a point about the fact that 400 years ago, gold showed its massive limitations, if not failure, as the ultimate money. We live in the digital age. We really shouldn't ignore the perfect money created that's never been hacked. Sure, platforms have been hacked that are holding Bitcoin, but you need to come to our mastermind. It's on Wednesday nights. I feel like, yes, I know you're busy. I know you're raising kids. You'd rather spend time with your grandkids. I'm sure there's 1,000 things you'd rather do. Just 8 p.m. Eastern for 90 minutes every Wednesday night. We've got to bring people up to speed so that they understand this asset, they understand this concept, because right now there is an opportunity for we, the plebes, the regular people, to front end run all these cities and counties and countries and pension plans and public companies who are going to be coming into Bitcoin. So you might think, oh, but a Bitcoin is like at the time I'm speaking right now, it's like 84,000. It's down right now. It's on sale. It's been as high as 109,000. So if you're hearing this while it's still in the 80s, it's way down off of its all-time high. So that would be a good time to buy it. Can't guarantee you that it won't crash down to way lower. I held my Bitcoin. It didn't sell a single bit of it when Bitcoin crashed down to like 17,000 for a minute. It's because I understand the asset that I'm holding. So I was kind of feeling like I've nagged my kids so much. I've given them information. I'm always sending them videos. I taught them this class that I hired someone to help me teach. So they're hearing it from somebody who isn't mom. I even bought them a small Bitcoin starter stash last year and said, you can't touch this until at least 2030. You can borrow against it if you want, but it's for you to watch. It's for you to have hope. I didn't give it to them because I've never been a mom who hands out money, but I gave it to them because I don't want them to lose hope. We got a lot of millennials who are feeling pretty hopeless. And so I put it out there so that they have a little stockpile. They didn't earn it. I'd rather they earn it, but I was kind of losing confidence that they were going to invest on their own. And I went to them when Bitcoin hit 78,000. It just was there for a minute and I bought more. And I texted my kids and I was like, you guys, here's a video to watch to learn more. I know you don't fully understand it, but I'm buying more right now. Please let me know if you want me to tell you when Bitcoin goes down and it's a good time to buy. Please let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to leave you alone on this topic. And 3 of my 4 kids said, hey, Mom, I do want to know. And I already bought some, or I'm going to buy some. So sometimes it takes a lot of touches. And you may come to our class. We've had people who come to class for kind of a long time before they get off of zero. I don't give financial advice. I don't know what the right number is for you or what percentage of your portfolio, but more and more financial advisors are starting to tell people that they should consider 2 to 5% of their portfolio or more. I'm at 50%. Okay, so I'm not Michael Saylor. Like I burned the boats. I shifted my entire company into Bitcoin. But when I started buying in March of 2020, I bought $50,000 worth. That was the level of my conviction when I started to learn. I had a $50,000 level of conviction. Since then, like I already told you, I sold $1.2 million worth of gold. So I'm now 7 figures committed to or convicted about Bitcoin. You shouldn't even be participating, not in a significant way, unless you understand the asset that you're buying. And that's why we run the mastermind, because otherwise it'll go up 50%. You'll be stoked. You'll be high-fiving yourself and you'll sell. And then guess what? Yay, you made 50%. You're going to have to pay some of it in capital gains. And now you're right back where you started, which is in dollars that are being debased and losing value by the day. So I have a lot to say about Bitcoin, and I think I've said enough for today, but I would like to invite you to come in with my co-teacher. I almost always have a co-teacher, and sometimes it's a company who has a really exciting innovation, like my alternative to health insurance. I love it. They have literally said yes to 99.98% of their claims in the last 5 years since they've been open. And they're Bitcoin backed, so I trust them more than people who are backed by the dollar, where I know it's just losing value. Their treasury is losing value. And, that's one of the things that you get joining the mastermind. So check it out. I'll put the link down below. Use the coupon code Robyn, ROBYN. That's my first name. I know it's spelled a little weird, but you get a 3rd month free, but you can also get an extra $50 off using my first name as a coupon code for an extra $50 off. Super cheap way to start learning about Bitcoin and just commit to spend 90 minutes every Wednesday night. Okay. I know you're not going to go spend 1,500 hours like me. So I consider my job to be being your shortcut to the library. I consider my job to be bringing you the best of the best. And I'm your Cliff's Notes every Wednesday night to give you more information about this asset. You got Donald Trump and the entire administration pro Bitcoin. JD Vance, big Bitcoin investor. Secretary of Commerce, Howard Lutnick, just announced his bank, Cantor Fitzgerald, is going to start lending on $2 billion worth of Bitcoin. So Bitcoin's the underlying collateral, lending in dollars. I'm all about that. If I were to go build a house, I would borrow against my Bitcoin. Aren't very many entities doing that right now. Trump family says that they're going to get involved in that. Howard Lutnick says he's starting a $2 billion Bitcoin fund to lend in dollars at Cantor Fitzgerald. There's a big gold rush on. More people want to get in that game. I think all the banks will pile in. So it's not that people are wanting to spend their Bitcoin, although there's a way to do that. I can tell you on Wednesday nights about a company where you're literally shown the way to live your entire life in Bitcoin. People who have Bitcoin, their life is getting cheaper and cheaper. Do you get that? So everybody's griping about how expensive life is getting. And for a Bitcoiner, it's crazy making because people who are sitting in dollars, intentionally sitting in dollars while their government abuses them and prints more money, which debases what they worked so hard for, they're getting poorer and poorer while those of us sitting in Bitcoin our lives are getting cheaper. Okay, so right now, Bitcoin's down. I don't care because then people I care about can buy some, and that's a good thing. And I hope the USA, because it's the country I live in, the country I love, I hope that they get to buy at a lower price. And then when it goes to 200,000 and 500,000 and a million, they will be able to gain from that and hopefully pay down our national deficit. El Salvador already did. El Salvador invested in a bunch of Bitcoin in 2020, made so much money that they paid off their national debt and bought another 6,000 Bitcoin. So that guy's name is Bukele. He's kind of an international hero, kind of a libertarian president, went from being the crime capital of Central and South America to it's literally becoming a resort destination and a place where American entrepreneurs are going to hire, and it's become safe, locked up all the criminals, adopted Bitcoin as legal tender. The government invested in Bitcoin. I'm sure that Bukele did lots of other good things, but those are the things that he's become famous for. I don't give financial advice, but zero exposure to Bitcoin is the wrong number. So that was kind of a fire hose. And Wednesday nights tend to be kind of a similar thing. But check down below. Join us. You won't be sorry. We have everybody in our mastermind is like, if I listen to you, I've doubled, tripled, quadrupled, or more my net worth. So we've been doing it for 4 years. We've gotten pretty good at it. We love newbies. We love beginners. Lately, Coach Willie and I have been at 9 p.m. for the last half hour. We're totally focused on brand new beginners, like people who ask questions like, do I have to buy a whole Bitcoin at once? There's no dumb questions. We want to answer questions like that because we can't get you off of knows nothing to joining us and having your life get better until we answer whatever the question is that you have. So bring your questions. It is very much a live experience. Heck, if you want to come on camera and ask your questions live, just tell us in the chat. So it's a great small group experience, and I do it not because it's particularly profitable for me to teach on this subject, but because I really, really want everybody to understand this asset so that your life can get better. And I want you to tell your children about it. Some of you, your children have told you about it, and your children in their 20s or 30s are investing in it before you did. Well, this is one of those times to listen to your kids. A lot of these companies who are custodying Bitcoin, there's some creative solutions out there for custodying Bitcoin and other things. A lot of them are like, the CEO is 30 years old. And I'm like, wow, that makes me nervous. I have a 31-year-old child. I'm not sure I'm ready to hand off wealth yet to someone the age of my child. However, the cream of the crop, the smartest millennials, among the 30, 31-year-olds, they're out there building solutions to some of our worst problems using Bitcoin. It's an amazing solution. You could literally get a master's degree in it, but all we ask is come Wednesday night, give it 90 minutes of your life. And we know sometimes you can't come. You can always listen to class later. It is posted for you in your mastermind. You can listen to the classes anytime, including whenever you join. You can go back and listen to my crowd health that I was just talking about, where they've paid 99.98% of their claims in their life cycle. They're about a 4 or 5-year-old company. So if somebody's doing something really interesting using Bitcoin, we have them on class. We ask them questions. You're as welcome to ask questions as I am. So join us in the mastermind. I hope this has been useful for you to help get you off of zero with Bitcoin. I find that when people get off of zero and they make their first Bitcoin investment, that's when they're willing to actually start learning. So join us in the mastermind. I'll see you on Wednesday night.